Everyone keeps saying the same thing, that before the Spanish showed up, the Philippines had no advanced technology, no real industry, no metallurgical tradition worth mentioning. This story has circulated for centuries. It's comfortable, it's tidy, and it's dead wrong. The Filipino blacksmith didn't just forge blades. Well, he forged weapons so effective that European colonial powers spent half a millennium trying to figure out the metallurgy behind them. They failed. Let me say that again. They failed. The deadliest sword in Asia came from islands that most European maps didn't even bother to label correctly. And the people who financed colonial expeditions, the merchants and crowns and trading companies, they knew it. They just didn't want you to know they knew it. Here's the core of this story, and I'm giving it to you right now. The Kris, along with its cousins, the Kampilan and the Barong, represented a level of blade engineering that European metallurgy couldn't match until the Industrial Revolution changed everything. Precisely everything. These weren't crude jungle machetes. They were pattern-welded, differentially hardened, master-class weapons with laminated steel cores and softer iron jackets. Filipino Panday, the traditional smiths, developed techniques that European bladesmiths in Toledo and Solingen would have envied. The reason this story stayed buried has nothing to do with the quality of the blades. It has everything to do with the economics of colonialism. You don't celebrate the technology of people you're trying to subjugate. Bad for business. Now let me take you inside the boardrooms of empire. Not literal boardrooms, but the calculations, the cold math. When Magellan's expedition reached the Visayas in 1521, the crew didn't encounter primitive islanders. They encountered organized societies with established trade networks stretching to China, India, Japan, and the Malay world. Raja Humabon's warriors carried blades, good ones, the kind that made Spanish soldiers write home about them. When Lapu-Lapu's fighters confronted Magellan on Mactan, European accounts described wounds that cut through armor and padded gambesons like they weren't even there. That caught attention. Not the romantic, heroic kind. The financial kind. Spanish administrators started asking questions. What kind of steel does this? How are they making it? Can we control the supply? The answer to that last question haunted colonial budgets for 3 centuries. They couldn't control it because the knowledge lived in the hands and memories of individual Panday scattered across thousands of islands. No centralized forge to seize, no single mine to capture, no written manual to confiscate. The technology was oral, familial, sacred. Each master smith passed techniques to chosen apprentices through years of direct instruction. You couldn't steal it by raiding a library. You'd have to become an apprentice yourself, and no Spanish administrator was about to do that. So they did the next best thing from a management perspective. They tried to suppress it. Colonial regulations periodically banned the forging and carrying of certain blades. Why would you ban something if it wasn't a threat? That ban tells you everything. If this kind of hidden history fires you up the way it fires me up, drop a like. Hit subscribe. This channel exists to dig up exactly these buried stories, the ones that reshape how we see the ancient world. Let me get into the metal itself, because this is where the Panday's genius becomes undeniable. European bladesmiths of the same era, the 10th through 16th centuries, mostly worked with a single type of steel per blade. A good Toledo sword was excellent steel, well-tempered, properly quenched. One material. The Filipino approach was radically different. A master Panday would forge weld multiple layers of different metals together. High carbon steel for the edge, softer iron for the spine and body. Sometimes nickel-rich meteoritic iron was folded into the mix, creating those distinctive wavy patterns in the Kris blade. This wasn't decorative. Each layer served a mechanical purpose. The hard edge held a razor line. The soft body absorbed shock without snapping. The blade could flex, absorb a parry, and spring back into shape. A European sword of comparable length would often shatter under the same stress. Stop for a second. Think about what that means. Smiths working without thermometers, without modern metallurgical textbooks, without spectroscopy, were producing composite blades that functioned on principles modern materials science would later validate. They understood through generations of empirical testing that layering dissimilar metals created a blade greater than the sum of its parts. This is the same principle behind modern laminated steel and even some aerospace composites. They got there 1,000 years earlier with charcoal forges and stone anvils and river water for quenching. The Kampilan deserves its own moment here. This was the great sword of the Philippines. Long, single-edged, with a distinctive forked pommel. Spanish colonial records describe it with a mix of terror and grudging respect. Its design was optimized for powerful, sweeping cuts against multiple opponents. The blade widened toward the tip, concentrating mass at the striking point. From a physics perspective, this created devastating cutting force. A European broadsword distributed weight more evenly along its length. To be honest, the Kampilan front-loaded its destructive power. Every cut landed like a weighted axe blow, but with the speed and reach of a sword. Colonial military administrators had to budget for replacement troops in regions where Kampilan-wielding warriors were active. That's the kind of detail that shows up in financial records. Really records, not heroic ballads. Men with spreadsheets worried about this blade. Then there's the barong. Shorter, leaf-shaped, thick-spined, almost like a cleaver fused with a short sword. The Moro warriors of Mindanao and Sulu carried these as sidearms. During the Moro resistance against Spanish and later American colonial forces, the barong earned a reputation. American military reports from the early 1900s documented incidents where Moro juramentados, oath-bound warriors, continued to fight despite injuries. The blades were so effective at close range that the U.S. Army eventually switched from the .38 caliber revolver to the .45 caliber M1911 pistol. Let that sink in. A Filipino blade forced the most powerful military on Earth to redesign its standard sidearm. That procurement decision cost millions. Someone sat in an office in Washington, looked at casualty reports, and authorized an entirely new weapon system because of a short sword forged in a jungle workshop. Why couldn't Europe replicate any of this? The question kept nagging at colonial metal workers, and the answer has several layers. One was raw material. The Philippine archipelago sits on some of the richest mineral deposits in the Pacific Ring of Fire. Iron-rich sands from rivers in Mindanao, Panay, and other islands provided ore with naturally occurring trace elements, small amounts of chromium, nickel, and other metals, that enhanced steel quality in ways the Panday understood intuitively but couldn't articulate in chemical formulas. European smiths working with different ore compositions couldn't reproduce the same alloy characteristics even when they tried to copy the forging techniques. Another layer was process knowledge. The Panday didn't just hammer hot metal. The forging process involved specific charcoal types, specific bellows rhythms, specific quenching temperatures judged by the color of the heated steel against the twilight sky. Not noon, not midnight. Twilight, because that particular ambient light let the smith read the steel's color most accurately. This level of refined, embodied knowledge doesn't transfer through written instructions. It transfers through doing, over years, under a master's eye. But here's what keeps me up at night thinking about this, and it connects to something much bigger than swords. The colonial economic model required a narrative. Resources flow from colony to metropole. Knowledge flows from metropole to colony. That's the story that justified the entire enterprise. If you admit that the colony possesses superior technology in even one domain, the narrative cracks. The spreadsheet no longer makes moral sense. So, you don't admit it. You suppress the blades. You ban the forging. You write histories that skip over the metallurgy. you frame the people as primitive and their weapons as crude. The producers of colonial mythology, and I use the word producers deliberately because they were managing a brand, made a calculated decision. Ignorance was cheaper than acknowledgement. It protected the investment thesis of empire. This calculated erasure had consequences that rippled forward through centuries. Filipino martial arts traditions like arnis, eskrima, and kali survived partly underground. The smithing traditions fragmented. Many lineages were broken. Some techniques were lost entirely. The remaining Panday who carry ancestral knowledge today are living libraries. When one dies without passing on their methods, a chapter of human technological achievement closes forever. No archive can replace them. Yet something remarkable happened in the modern era. International bladesmiths and metallurgists began studying surviving examples of Filipino blades. What they found astonished them. Analysis of antique Chris blades revealed carbon content and microstructure patterns consistent with what we now call pattern-welded Damascus steel. Some specimens showed evidence of techniques that predated or paralleled the legendary Wootz steel of India. The Filipino smithing tradition wasn't derivative of Indian or Malay methods, though there was cross-pollination through trade. It was an independent metallurgical tradition that arrived at similar solutions through separate innovation, convergent technological evolution, happening on islands that colonial historians dismissed as cultural backwaters. Interesting fact. The modern Philippine government and cultural organizations have started recognizing surviving Master Panday as national living treasures. This is a management decision too, but a different kind. It's an investment in preservation rather than suppression. Some universities in the Philippines have begun documenting traditional forging methods with scientific rigor, pairing the Panday's ancestral knowledge with modern metallurgical analysis. Really analysis. The results consistently validate what the old smiths knew by feel and instinct. Their steel was world-class. Their methods were sound. Their engineering intuition was, by any objective measure, extraordinary. Pull back now, way back. Beyond swords and colonial ledgers and military procurement budgets. What does it mean that for 500 years, a technological achievement of this magnitude went largely unrecognized by the wider world? It means our understanding of human innovation is still shaped by who controlled the printing press, who wrote the history books, who managed the narrative. Genius doesn't announce itself through press releases. It shows up in a river valley at dawn, in the hands of a smith who learned from his father, who learned from his grandfather, who learned from the ancestors before memory. It shows up in the ring of hammer on steel, in the hiss of a blade plunging into water, in the flex of a weapon that bends but refuses to break. Look, the Panday didn't need Europe's approval. They didn't need validation from any empire's accounting department. They forged steel that spoke for itself, blade by blade, generation after generation, across a span of time that dwarfs the colonial interruption. Well, empires rise and collapse. Budgets are approved and forgotten. Somewhere on an island in the Philippine archipelago, if we're lucky, a smith is still heating iron in a charcoal forge, still reading the color of the steel against the fading sky, still carrying forward a tradition that outlasted every power that ever tried to erase it. That's not just metallurgy. That's a testament to what human beings are capable of when knowledge is treated as sacred, when craft is treated as inheritance, and when no amount of suppression can extinguish the fire in the forge or the memory in the hands. Some technologies are measured in patents and production runs. Others are measured in centuries of survival against every conceivable odd. The Filipino blade tradition is the second kind. And 500 years from now, when our modern empires are footnotes, someone might still be forging steel the old way. Hammer and fire and memory. The deadliest sword in Asia wasn't deadly because of hatred. It was deadly because of love, love for craft, love for lineage, love for the idea that what your ancestors knew matters enough to protect with your life. That kind of love doesn't fit on a spreadsheet, and that's exactly why no empire could ever reproduce it.